They called him the King of the Ring, a man who knocked out legends and struck fear into his opponents. But behind the power, behind the knockouts, was a man fighting a much bigger battle. From the streets to Olympic gold, from world champion to rock bottom, from losing it all to making the greatest comeback in boxing history. This is the untold story of George Foreman, the warrior, the preacher, the man who proved that no matter how hard life hits you, you can always rise again. Stay till the end, because this is a story you'll never forget. George Foreman was born into poverty in Marshall, Texas in 1949. Raised in a tough neighborhood, George's childhood was marked by hardship and struggle. His family barely had enough to survive, and George quickly learned that life wouldn't hand him anything for free. He dropped out of school at 15 and found himself drifting toward a dangerous path, getting into street fights, running with the wrong crowd, and even resorting to petty crime just to get by. He had no direction, no purpose, just anger and desperation. But what no one knew was that this troubled young man would one day be crowned the King of the Ring and later become one of the most inspiring comeback stories the world had ever seen. Everything changed when George joined the Job Corps at 16. It was there that a mentor noticed George's raw power and suggested he try boxing. At first, George wasn't interested. He saw boxing as just another fight. But when he stepped into the ring for the first time, something clicked. His anger, his frustration, his pain, all of it fueled his fists. He was a natural. George quickly gained a reputation for his devastating power and brutal knockouts. His rise was meteoric. By 1968, he won a gold medal in the Olympics, standing tall on the podium with an American flag in his hand. The world was starting to notice George Foreman, but the real battle was just beginning. In 1973, George fought Joe Frazier for the heavyweight championship. Frazier was undefeated, the reigning champion, and no one expected George to win. But in just 2 rounds, George knocked Frazier down 6 times. The fight wasn't just a victory, it was domination. George Foreman was now the heavyweight champion of the world. He was feared, ruthless, invincible. But with success came darkness. George became consumed by the spotlight, the money, the fame, the lifestyle. He grew angry and bitter. He fought not for glory, but for survival. He once said, "I was so mean in the ring, I wanted to kill my opponent." Then came the fight that changed everything. In 1974, George faced Muhammad Ali in the legendary Rumble in the Jungle. George was the heavy favorite, younger, stronger, undefeated, but Ali had a plan. He used the infamous rope-a-dope strategy, letting George swing wildly until he tired himself out. In the 8th round, Ali landed a clean combination, and George fell. He didn't just lose the fight, he lost his identity. The knockout shattered him. George spiraled into depression. He questioned everything: his life, his purpose, his fate. The knockout haunted him. The man who was once untouchable was now broken. But George's story didn't end there. In 1977, after a brutal defeat in the ring, George had a near-death experience in the locker room. He felt his soul leaving his body, drifting into darkness. In that moment, George cried out to God, begging for a second chance. And then he felt peace, light, a voice telling him it wasn't his time. George woke up a changed man. He walked away from boxing and became a preacher. He opened a church, dedicated his life to faith and service. People thought he was crazy for giving up the spotlight, but George knew he had found something greater than fame. He had found peace. For 10 years, George stayed away from the ring, but financial struggles forced him to consider the impossible, a comeback. At 38 years old, George announced his return to boxing. People laughed. He was too old, too slow, out of shape. But George didn't care. He fought with a new purpose, not for fame, not for money, but to inspire. To prove that it's never too late to chase your dream. Fight after fight, George silenced the critics. Then in 1994, at the age of 45, 20 years after losing to Ali, George faced Michael Moorer for the heavyweight title. Moorer was younger, faster, and undefeated. But George had something Moorer didn't: experience, wisdom, and heart. In the 10th round, George landed a crushing right hand, and Moorer went down. George Foreman became the oldest heavyweight champion in history. When the referee raised George's hand, tears filled his eyes. He had reclaimed the title, but more importantly, he had reclaimed himself. George Foreman wasn't just a fighter. He was a symbol of resilience, redemption, and faith. His comeback wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. He taught the world that failure isn't final, and that true strength comes from within. Years later, George would reinvent himself again, not as a fighter, but as a businessman. The George Foreman grill would make him a household name, earning him over $200 million. But George never forgot where he came from. He continued preaching, mentoring young fighters, and giving back to his community. When asked about his journey, George once said, "They called me the king of the ring, but the greatest victory of my life wasn't in the ring, it was finding peace." George Foreman's story is more than a boxing legend. It's a testament to the power of faith, resilience, and redemption. He taught the world that no matter how many times life knocks you down, you can always rise again.